Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's meetup, where we'll be talking about creating a savings policy to reach your goals. One of the things I love about our book this month, Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, is that the whole book, we're following this person who has this really strong desire to buy her Dior dress. And it is a goal that is so far out of her comfort zone and something she's really having to be kind of scrappy and resourceful to get for herself. And at the beginning of the year, as we are all kind of thinking through maybe what we want in our lives and our goals and our intentions for the year, I feel like it's a really cool person to follow or story to follow as we kind of go through that process and figure out how we can do these things for ourselves. So, with that, we're going to be talking about how you can create a savings policy to reach your own goal that you might have this year. So, really, when you go think about creating a savings policy, I really boil it down and make it very simple and keep it to three kind of core steps, right? So, the first thing is that we're going to be going through the process of actually defining your goal. Like, obviously, if you don't have anything to work towards, you don't really know how you're going to go about getting it or anything like that. So, that's going to be step one. The second is going to be creating your policy and figuring out how can you actually put money towards the goal that you're trying to reach. And then the third one is going to be all about implementing the policy that you have, how you put it into action. So, the first thing I want to do as we go through this process, I think it's significantly more fun and engaging if you actually take a second and think through what type of savings goal that you want to reach this year. And it can be anything, large or small. It could be buying a really cool chic handbag that you've been wanting. It could be saving for a car. It could be saving for a home down payment. Nothing's really too large or small to be thinking through. But as you go through this process today, I think if you grab like a journal or a quick pen and paper and sit down and think through what you want to accomplish, it kind of makes the whole thing a little more tangible. And then hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have kind of a game plan for how you'll attain it. I'll give everyone just a minute or two. I would love to if you feel up to sharing if you want to throw what your savings goals are or one of your ideas for savings goal in the chat box. That could be really fun. Okay. Everybody got something? Cool. So when you're looking at this goal on paper, I want you to think through a couple of questions, right? And really take some time to reflect because I find that even just high level having this goal in your head, it's not really enough to make it tangible for you or also to make it something that is salient to your life that's going to be top of mind. And so when we think through your goals, some things to ask yourself. And again, I'm a big believer in the power of journaling. And so if you go through your journal and you're thinking through what this top savings goal is, there are really other follow-up questions that you want to ask to really get it defined. So the first one is, why is this goal actually important to me? Right? What we know from theories of planned behavior and the trans-theoretical model of change, so things where we are having to change our behavior or we're going after a goal, is that goals that have a background or a why that is more intrinsic to us, to what we actually want, are more likely to be accomplished or to be stuck to than things that are more extrinsically focused. So, what does that mean? That means that things where, for example, oh, I need to buy this handbag because it's a cool thing to do, or if I buy it, then it'll look really cool for other people to see, may not be at quite as motivating as something that you just want for yourself. And so when you think about your goals, you're really going to want to understand that why. And that can also help push you over the edge when things are, tougher, if you have setbacks as you try to obtain it. So the next thing is just more practical. How much money do you actually need to achieve this goal, right? So when it comes to savings goals, you're really going to want to have some type of number or some type of metric in mind so that you know exactly what you need to do to accomplish it. The other thing that can be important is it a short term or long term goal? Now, this becomes important because you're looking at how you want to go about it. And that very well might change depending on if this is something that, oh, okay, this is like a couple weeks worth of savings or something that I can do with a paycheck or two versus my goal is to retire with this amount of money. Well, that's going to be significantly long term. And again, you would just approach it a little bit differently than something that's just like a short-term purchase or something like that. And then the last one that I would love for people to think through is how does this impact your other goals that you may have? And so when you think about your savings goal, it could be where you are upping the ante on a goal. I wanted to retire with $1 million. I want to retire with $5 million. It could be that you are swapping off a goal where it's like, well, I wanted to buy this handbag, now I want to buy this one. But it can also be a situation where, hey, I've got this other more pressing goal. My goal is to buy a house right now, and so you might that goal being something that is maybe more important than some of your other ones might be pushing some of your other ones to be on hold, right? So I'm buying, and my goal is to buy a house this year. I might delay like trying to save for a car right now or something like that. So it's kind of important to understand how these would impact other areas of your life or of your financial goals as well. So when you start thinking about this, I suspect that people who are familiar with SMART goals will see a very familiar pattern, right? Which that when we really start defining our goals, we really do start to also fall along this SMART framework. There is a reason why it's so popular, and it really does help to make your goals more tangible. And it can be useful for all kinds of goals. Here in this forum, we're generally talking about personal finance, and so that is what we are leaning towards. But again, anytime that you're goal setting, then this can be a really helpful framework for you to utilize. One of the things that I like to point out, though, when we talk about SMART goals for financial goals, especially like little short ones, right? Which is, for example, in our book, in Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, she wanted to buy a Dior dress. Well, she found out how much it was. It was specific, a Dior dress for however much amount, right? It was measurable. She knew exactly how much money that she needed to get. She knew it was achievable, even though it was a stretch. It wasn't so much of a stretch of being like, this is never going to be possible. It's not even sold anywhere near I can get, right? So it's something that she could actually do, that it was possible to obtain. And it was something that, was relevant to her life. Now, this one's arguable, right? Because we could say this is completely out of her zone. She's not going to use this dress. She's not going to do all these things. But for her, it was something that, was meaningful to her. And so the last piece, though, I will say does not always apply to some of our financial goals, especially when it's something to like obtain something or to obtain something or have a specific experience, then it might not be completely time bound, right? So it's helpful when they are, when you say, okay, well, I want to save for a trip to I'm going to use Antarctica because it's top of mind and something that I want to do, but I'm going to save to go on a trip to Antarctica by next year. Or if I know that, there's a cruise going there next summer, well, I'm going to save for it to be able to pay for it by next summer. That's one thing, right? But it also could be a situation where you're saying, hey, I know that I want to go to Antarctica at some point, and I know I need this amount of money, but it isn't time bound. I'm just going to keep adding to this fund until I have enough. And that's where savings policies can be so useful, because when it's not time bound, it still is letting you keep contributing towards this goal, even if you don't have a very specific time frame that you need to reach to hit it. So I wanted to kind of explain that aspect of why sometimes for purchases that are for our lives, there are goals that we want to meet financially, they may not actually have that T aspect that's so often talked about when we talk about goal definition. Okay, so let's talk about savings policy. Savings policies on their most basic form is really just a pre-constructed plan for how you're going to save for what you want. And the reason why they're important is because when you decide in advance what you're going to do with your funds, with any kind of windfalls you have, with your paycheck before it comes in, it really helps you to reduce a decision fatigue, but also the friction that can come with having to then decide every month of like, well, do I do this or do I do that? Do I do this or do I do that? Well, you don't have any of that if you already kind of have a policy in place. You know what's going to happen. And you can apply this to so many things. If my salary goes up by X amount, then I'm going to do this. If I receive this money, then I'm going to do this. But you already have it decided in advance. And that can really help for you to stick to your overall plan, right? Without having to constantly put yourself through the willpower of sticking with your goal. The other thing is that you want to have it be somewhere that's visible or that you understand like what it is, right? I mean, generally, I think it's a nice thing to have your goals be top of mind and be present in your life in a way that are tangible to you. But I think it can also be supremely helpful when you can kind of understand where your policy is. Now, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, it could just be in your journal, you wrote it down and then you executed it. And we'll talk about implementing in just a second here. But also, you want to make sure that it's not going to be something like you thought of this plan one time, you kind of came up with this policy, and then you never followed it again. Well, that's not really helpful, right? As with so many things in finance, we can have the best intentions, we can have the knowledge and know-how, but if we're not actually applying it, then you're not really getting the benefit of all of that knowledge and kind of hard work to plan it out. And the other thing I will say is that for any kind of savings policies, no two policies will look alike. No different practices or methods by which people are choosing to save is necessarily going to look the same. Now, there are lots of different methods that we'll talk about here in a second as well of how you can go about this. But I do think it's a very much an individualized activity. And so I think that it can be a really interesting process to sit down and think about how you specifically can reach specific goals. And even when you think about different goals, that they will also differ as well, so that different policies may work best for some things and not for others. So let's dive into ways that you can actually save for a goal. So, of course, one that we hear quite often are going to be like regular contributions. Well, if you think about this, it could be stuff like saving for retirement, right? Or saving for anything that's, that's significantly longer term, right? So you're saying, okay, I'm going to put in $100 of my paycheck. I'm going to take 5% of my earnings, and it's going to get put from this goal put towards this goal every month. This can work really well for long-term goals. And also it can work really well if you're trying to save for something that is a big amount of money or even a small amount of money, but that will take multiple times or multiple months to put towards it. So I can only do a little bit here, a little bit there. Well, that really adds up, right? So $5 a month over or $5 a week or something like that can really add up over time. But if you only have like a little bit to save, but you can do so regularly, then that method can work really well for you. Lump sums are when you're setting aside larger amounts, but in more regular intervals. Now, what can be helpful about like lump sums is that it really takes advantage of a windfall. And I really like when you have a game plan for those types of cash that comes in, because then you know that when you have a savings policy in place for those lump sums, is that if you do end up getting cash that's beyond what you expected for whatever reason, and I'll give you some places where that might happen, then you already know what you're going to do with it. And again, that really helps you to not have to rely on willpower or anything like that at the moment that something like that comes in. So what are examples of a windfall? That can just be any unexpected money, but that can include things like, oh, someone gave you $100 for your birthday, right? Or someone gifted you with a bunch of gift cards or something like that that you hadn't expected to get, but that you could utilize to get closer to your goal. Or you can swap out that money and like move over from your checking account that amount into the savings account for your goal, and then use this other money that you didn't expect to come in. Bonuses that you may be getting through work, right? If you're not planning for that expenses and you're planning mostly for your regular paycheck, and then you get your bonus in, well, okay, how do I plan to spend this bonus? Well, if you've already got a game plan of how it's going to be utilized, it ensures that that check is not going to be kind of eaten up randomly, but it's going to go to the things that are most important to you. So flipping that lump sum on its head. Oh, let me point out one other thing about lump sums. It also could be a situation where you just know that, okay, like this month I don't have much, while you might have like a car insurance payment or something that comes up irregularly in one month. And so it's not a high savings month for you. But on the other hand, if you have another month where you're like, oh man, I always have more money in like March because the holidays are past, I'm not traveling in that month, like nothing's really going on. Well, when I get to March and whatever cash flow I have left over, all of that is just going to go towards this goal. So that's another example of a lump sum that's not a result of a windfall. So you can also do windfalls only. And so windfalls only just means that you only save towards this goal when you kind of get this excess cash or this kind of surprise cash. Now, this may take you a much longer time to reach your goal because you may or may not often be getting these windfalls of cash. However, it does ensure that when you do get them, that it's going towards your top priority goals or things that are really, really important to you that you'll be able to get. And it makes it an easy way for you to save up for those things without dipping into your regular paycheck or other dollars that may be otherwise allocated to other things that you need or want. And so that can be a fun way to save for things, especially if they're things that are kind of like non-essential or that you don't really need it in a timely fashion. So for side income, of course, as we talk about this a lot, I feel like it's very pervasive in our culture right now, is the concept of a side hustle. But I think when it comes to financial goals, having a side hustle that is specifically to reach a specific financial goal, I think can be a really valuable way to, again, bring in extra income specifically to fund that goal. And I've seen people who just have a side hustle just for the time that they need to reach the goal that they have, and others that just say, oh, okay, well, I'm working this extra job and bringing in a little extra income, but that income's going to go towards this kind of thing that I want that's not really a need or something like that. And then after I reach that goal, I'm going to choose something else and then going to use the income that is cast off from this job for that. What's nice about this method is that it also helps you to really break apart your income so that you know, like, okay, if I've got all of the necessary expenses and things like that taken care of with like my regular paycheck or other things, then the side income I can feel completely guilt free, completely comfortable using on these other things that are just for my own gratification. And so that can be a nice way to kind of segue your income and kind of allow yourself some freedom to be able to kind of do what you want with a specific portion of your cash. Now, any and all of these methods are perfectly like helpful and useful. And I do think it's interesting in our book this month about how you see Mrs. Harris utilizing actually several different types of these methods in order to reach her goal. And so I think that that's kind of an interesting thing too, of that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can use all of these different methods or some of these methods to reach your goal, or you can, kind of cherry pick the ones that work best for you and work best for the goal that you specifically have in mind. So what are some examples of these? So here are four examples of actual savings policies and kind of how they would work. So the first one is I'm going to put $300 a month into a travel savings account until I have $3,000 for a cruise to Greece. I would love to go to a cruise to Greece. Definitely on my bucket list. But the second one would be anytime I receive monetary gifts, I'm going to save them for a new couch. So we know that this is a windfall strategy. So anytime that I get extra money in, I'm just going to put it somewhere and that's going to be saved up for my couch. One thing I would note here is that a lot of these can be really helpful when you have your own separate account specifically that you can keep dumping money into for these particular goals. That can be really helpful just to ensure that it doesn't get sucked up into other expenses if there is extra money sitting in there. So the third one is looking at a long-term goal. And this is saying, I'm going to defer 10% of my salary each month for retirement. And then I'm going to increase my deferral to 20% when I get my annual bonus. Well, this is a combo, right? So we're saying we're going to have a regular contribution to this goal, but then also we're going to make a bigger lump sum contribution when I get a windfall that I know I'm going to get, but that kind of comes in maybe once a year or something like that. And so for the last one, this is using example that I've heard from a friend, but I'm going to use my extra money that I earn from the side hustle to save it for a car. And then once I get the car, I'm going to use it for something else. And so this is showing where you're still using this extra income. You're using it just for kind of goal fulfillment and your own gratification. But once you reach one goal, you just kind of swap the goal and it can be used for something else while you're enjoying the benefit of the goal that you already accomplished and reached. So when you think about implementing any kind of savings policy, I think it's important to understand kind of the why and like how we make it stick. So the first thing is goal setting is super important because it helps us to really establish our intention, and understanding your why behind that again makes that intention just stronger, your motivation stronger. For why you want to achieve your goal, what is going to mean to you, and can help you to really navigate when things are kind of tough, when you're hitting setbacks or things like that, or maybe even when it's taking a long time. But the other one that I think we often do not talk about is the perception of ease. Is it easy to do? So I'm a big believer in, setting intentions, but making it easy for yourself. And so when we're looking at implementing any kind of behavior of trying to reach a financial goal, it takes a lot more than just having the intention to actually make it a reality, right? So there are things that we need to do. There's actions we need to take. But when we think about something being super hard to do, then the less likely as humans that we're going to do it. And so when you're thinking about your own savings policy, Also be thinking about, how do I make this seem easy? Well, if you're thinking about some high amount, where if you're trying to say, okay, well, I need $2,000 for, you know, whatever, for a trip, then if you're like, great, I'm going to save $1,000 a month and just go like, oh, so hardcore and save this money. But if that is really, really hard for you to do, then you're more than likely not going to necessarily reach it, right? But if you put it over a longer period of time and say, hey, I know I can do this. I'm just going to do $100 a month and it's going to take me longer, but I'm going to get it done. Well, that might be make it much more likely for you to be able to actually do it. And if your intentions are strong, then much more likely to stick with it, even if it's taking a little bit of longer time. And so for each individual and for every goal, you have to kind of think through what would make you feel like it's easy. But I think that taking that extra step to kind of make it easy for yourself will make it much more likely that you actually stick to the policy that you create. Things that I personally always talk about when it comes to perception of ease is automation for savings. I'm a huge fan of automating your savings, right? So if you're trying to save $100 a month for whatever purpose, then just make a standard recurring distribution to come out of your bank account into your savings account every month. The likelihood that you're going to necessarily go in and make it harder on yourself to go in and change the automation unless you really need to is more unlikely, right? Because your default is for it to just go through. And if it's already going to happen, then the likelihood of you going in and changing it or whatever, remember to change it, all these kinds of things are less likely, which in this case, we're kind of using our own sense of what's easy and what's hard for our benefit. Because if you're making it harder to not save, then it's greater that you will save, right? We saw things like this with there's studies like this that kind of show the benefits of doing this with things like retirement accounts, of making it kind of a default to contribute or things like that, and shows that it has increased retirement contributions. And so you can use that same kind of understanding of making the perception of ease, making it easy for yourself for your own benefit as well. The other thing is highly recommend having a separate account to where you will put your own savings into. And so with this, I really like a high yield savings account. Obviously, with high yield savings account, it's a little bit separated from your own accounts, but on the other hand, it also is giving you additional interest that can kind of add up and snowball and kind of add to the contributions that you're making. And I think it can feel really, really good when you're saving some, and then you're also getting the benefit of some added interest onto your goals to kind of like bolster up how quickly you're going to achieve it as well. So highly recommend high yield savings accounts being a great place to store money for a near term goal as well. So when you're thinking about this, as we begin to wrap up, um, really want to ask yourself, what are three methods that you could potentially use to save for the goal that you had in mind at the beginning of our meetup today? And then the second thing I want you to ask is, what is most likely to be successful for you right now? And I'd love if you put into the chat um, any kind of method that kind of most spoke to you and what you might like to see. Oh, this is awesome. So one person saying that they want to save up money for a trip to Korea and Japan. That'd be incredible. That'd be so awesome. I also really would like to visit Japan. And so the other thing is that I would love to see what's most likely for you to succeed. One thing that we also understand is you want to set yourself up for success. And so when you're thinking through what might work best for you, really, really sit down and see like, okay, like how can I break this down to make it easy for me, and what's going to be engaging and fun for me to do, and that's going to feel fulfilling for me, so that you can actually stick with your goal. So that's something I would also highly recommend that you spend some time thinking about. Okay. All right. So just for a high level review of what we talked about today, when it comes to making a savings policy, the biggest thing is going to be setting up a savings goal and making it specific and actionable to you. And that's going to really vary by person. You're really going to want to make sure that any goal that you create is going to align with your internal values. You're really going to want to dig into that why of why you want to do this, what makes it interesting to you. And as always, as you will always hear me say, making sure that it aligns with the values that you have as well. And then creating a policy to reduce the friction from making this decision constantly. The more that you can automate and make it easy for you to stick to your policy, the more likely it will be that you stick to it. And the last thing will just be celebrate reaching your goal. How exciting will it be when people, go on their trip to Korea and Japan? And for me, go on my trip to Antarctica. There's a lot of traveling in this group. So I think that those types of things are really exciting. And of course, with any kind of milestone that you hit, I think it's important to take some time to actually celebrate making those wins, especially if you had a goal, made a plan, and got it. That's really impressive. And so for anybody who is out there striving for these goals, I think taking time to celebrate those wins is going to be really important as well. So with that, I want to say thank you all so much for joining for today. And if you have, I'm going to cut our recording here. And then if anyone has any questions, I'll be sticking around for a few minutes to answer them. Okay. Thanks, everybody.